Good morning. As always, I hope that you studied for the vocab quiz and found the quiz to your liking, that you were prepared for today. We are in Chapter 2, the spread of civilization, and in particular, Section 3, the Indus Valley civilization. On page 32 in your book, you'll find the It Matters Because. The Indus River Valley was the largest of the early river valley civilizations. Climate and an extensive river system supported agriculture, the development of cities, and widespread trade for Indian civilization. So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at today as we talk about the Indus Valley civilization. So here's our characteristics of civilization bell ringer. It's up to you to decide whether you agree or disagree with the following statements, and you can see what your choices A, B, C, and D are. So do you agree or strongly disagree, or are you somewhere in the middle on the thought that urban planning is critical to the creation of civilizations? We have to understand what urban planning is. Urban is in city areas, and having forethought, planning your infrastructure, your buildings, and things that you will place there. Is this critical to the creation of a civilization? Our second question is, we can learn very little about a civilization whose writing system is unknown. So in other words, how is it possible for us to learn anything about a civilization if we don't understand their writing? Are there other ways that we can learn from a civilization? You got to decide how you feel about that answer. Interactions between civilizations and nomadic cultures produce only destruction. So you have people who are settled down and people who roam around. The interactions between them, do those only produce destruction? When those two types of peoples meet, is the outcome almost always negative? Now, it's up for you to decide how you feel about that. As we talk about our lesson today and go through it, I want you to kind of come back to these statements and see where you felt and see how it gauges on later as we investigate a few things. Let's now take a look at our Indus Valley geography. So we've got the Himalayan mountains that form the northern border of the Indian subcontinent. They are the highest mountains in the world. This is where you'll find K2, Kilimanjaro, Mount Everest. It's the largest and highest mountain. It's the highest mountain range in the world. Immediately south of the Himalaya is the Ganges River, the Ganges River Valley, a chief region of Indian culture. The dry Deccan Plateau stretches from the Ganges Valley to the southern tip of India. There's lush plains that are found on India's eastern and western coast. So what we're seeing already through these few points is a diverse geography. You have the Himalayan mountains, you have mountain ranges, you have river valleys, you have plateaus, you also have lush plains. So India, this area that we're looking at, which later becomes areas of India and small pieces of China, everything that is west of Mesopotamia, this area is a very diverse geographical area, which provides different ways of development and growth throughout the region. We also have monsoons. These are seasonal wind patterns that cause heavy rainfall in the summer and the winter. Indian farmers depend on the summer monsoon rains to grow their crops. So now we can see how geography is impacting the civilization. Because of the monsoons that are predictable, these peoples of the Indus Valley, they know what they can grow, what will flourish in this area. So geography always impacts a civilization. The Indus or Harappan civilization included more than 1,000 settlements. Among them were the planned communities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Urban planning in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. All houses were built in the same plan. A square courtyard surrounded by rooms, though they did vary in size. Streets were laid out in a grid pattern. Main streets running north to south were crossed by smaller east-west roads. Now, we still see this today. If you open up a map of any major city, especially your big cities, New York, Chicago, they're laid out on a grid, and grids make everything so much easier. Anytime you pull up a map, just like the map at the front of our classroom, we have our latitude and longitude. This is essentially a grid, and grids are much more easy to navigate, traverse, than just random patterns of roads like trails on a mountain way. There were also public wells that supplied all their residents with fresh water. So we see that the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan civilization, Mohenjo-daro, that they are forward thinkers. They actually invent some of the things that we still use today as far as how we lay out our urban centers. They had an advanced drainage system. It moved wastewater from bathrooms to sewage pits beyond the city walls. So this is kind of fun to me. If I haven't told your class or not, as a young child, I was always fascinated with hydrodynamics, I guess you could say, or hydro whatever. It was water. I love the way that water flows. Like I said, as a child on the beach, I would never build sandcastles. I would always dig the trenches, make a pool for the water to pool into, a little exit way, maybe a dam or something. I was always just fascinated with the way that water flows. Now, so what we see here is they're using an advanced drainage system. If you know anything about drainage, if you don't have any kind of incline or decline, your water will pool. And they're using the system to move wastewater from bathrooms. They had bathrooms that moved their poo and their pee, and they took it to sewage pits beyond the city walls, where it could then decompose by itself and not become a eyesore, a nose sore, or even worse, a source of disease that would infect them. And so they put this beyond the city walls. So this was a huge innovation by the Indus Valley civilization. Now let's talk about their divine rule. As in Egypt and Mesopotamia, religion and political power were linked. They looked at their political heads also as their religious leaders, those who were ordained or divine from the gods. Royal palaces also served as temples, and rulers based their power on a belief in divine assistance. Let's look at their economy. The Indus Valley economy was based on farming. Indus Valley goods and raw materials were traded as far away as Mesopotamia. So we'll look at a map here in just a little bit, and we'll see these areas that we're talking about. All right, so here we have terms on the right side that apply to, may or may not apply to the situation that we're talking about in our Indus Valley civilization. So we have urban planning, which is actual city planning, public works, sewage, water, police protection, different things like that. Architecture, we have farming, we have trade, manufacturing, and transportation. So here's our first item. Here's our first piece of a civilization. They laid their cities out on a grid of broad north to south streets, crossed by narrower east to west streets. Now, does this apply to urban planning? It does. Does this apply to public works? The laying out of their streets on a grid pattern. Does this apply to public works? It does. Does this apply to architecture? Architecture is the design and construction of buildings, so it doesn't apply to the layout of the streets. Does this apply to farming? What about trade? Manufacturing? Obviously, it doesn't apply to transportation. Remember, the roads are just the method that you'll use to travel. Will cost a transportation bridge, pun intended, in just a little bit. All right, here's our next one. Houses with square courtyards are surrounded by rooms. Does this apply to urban planning? Public works? Nope. Architecture? Indeed. Farming? Trade? Manufacturing? What about transportation? No. So the houses, the way that they build their houses with square courtyards, and they surrounded that courtyards by other rooms, this applies to urban planning and architecture only. What about the water supply? It provided by public wells. Is this water supply part of urban planning? It is, because it's part of developing your city. It's definitely a public work, not quite part of architecture, farming, or trade, nor manufacturing or transportation. What about the wastewater drainage system that I was so fascinated with? Is this part of urban planning? Public works? Architecture? Not quite. Farming? Trade? Probably not manufacturing, and probably not transportation. What about their garbage disposal system? Is this part of urban planning? It's definitely a public work. It's not part of architecture or farming or trade, nor manufacturing, nor transportation. So garbage disposal system is specifically for the cities and the people who live in them. What about farming of wheat, barley, and peas? This is not an urban planning. It's not public works, nor architecture. It's obviously farming. Now, why is it not trade? Because we're just talking about the farming, the actual planting and growing of wheat, barley, and peas. We're not talking about trading them, not yet. This is not manufacturing because manufacturing is different from actual agriculture. And it's obviously not part of transportation. Imports of Sumerian textiles and food. Does this have anything to do with urban planning? Public works? Architecture? Farming? Well, it's an import, so this should have something to do with trade. Maybe not manufacturing because we're not making something. And there's nothing to do with transportation. Poor old transportation is just getting left out. Exports of Indus Valley copper, lumber, precious stones, cotton, and luxury goods. Not urban planning, nor public works, or architecture. It's not farming. We're not talking about the planting and growing of goods. We're definitely talking about trade. We're definitely talking about manufacturing. And we're not talking about transportation. Not quite yet. Some goods were carried by overland trade routes. Not urban planning, nor public works, nor architecture or farming. This definitely involves trade, not manufacturing, and finally, transportation gets its time in the sun. Maritime trade, which means trade by sea, shipping across the Persian Gulf to Mesopotamia. Not urban planning, nor public works, architecture, nor farming. Definitely trade, definitely not manufacturing, but definitely transportation. So these are just some of the things that we see that help with specialization in this Indus Valley civilization. Urban planning, public works, architecture, farming, trade, manufacturing, and transportation. All of these are things that modern cities today still engage in, and back in the Indus Valley, they were engaging in them as well, showing just how far advanced their civilization was. All right, we want to talk a little bit now about migration and interaction. The main question we're trying to answer is, why did India's culture change after 1500 BC? And the answer to that is, well, the migratorial patterns and interactions with the environment. So although the way the Indus civilization ended remains a mystery, archaeologists have identified these factors that contributed to its decline. The first one was flooding. The second was earthquake. There was a change in climate, an environmental change that was caused by human settlement, and a change in the course of the Indus River. So all of these factors, including an influx of nomadic Aryan peoples from Central Asia, all of these things may have contributed to the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. Let's talk a little bit now about the Israelites. The Indus Valley civilization had its own written language, which used characters, symbols, and other marks to convey meaning. The number of distinct symbols used in the Indus writing system is at least 250 and may possibly be as high as 500. So that's a lot of different symbols in their language. While archaeologists have succeeded in translating Egyptian and Sumerian writing, they have not yet been able to interpret the writing of the Indus civilization. When the Indus Valley civilization collapsed around 1750 BC, the use of this writing system vanished. Around 1000 BC, however, South Asians developed a writing system for an Indo-European language known as Sanskrit. Now, there's a little bit more behind the stories that we're looking into right now when we're talking about the decline of the Indus Valley civilization, but that's up to you. You need to get in your book, make sure you're doing your reading. These things may or may not appear on your test, and the only way to be prepared is to read your text. All right, let's wrap up. Chapter 2, Lesson 3, The peoples of the Indus Valley Review. Monsoons are seasonal wind patterns that cause heavy rainfall in the summer and winter. Indian farmers depend on the summer monsoon rains to grow their crops. The Indus or Harappan civilization included more than 1,000 settlements. Among them were the planned communities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. The decline of the Indus Valley is unclear, but archaeologists have identified several factors in its decline, including but not limited to flooding, earthquake, and climate change. As always, make sure that you have your vocab activities completed. Make sure that you do your GRA tonight. It's due by midnight. Study for your vocab quiz at our next class meeting. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to post them to our Q&A section. Remember to add vocab words to our glossary so that you can study them for later. And as always, read your textbook and prepare always in advance for your test. If there's no further questions, comments, or concerns, y'all have a good day. I will see you next time.